Always true.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?
Poštovani gledatelji, gost emisije Recite Al Jazeeri je Omar Suleiman, međunarodno je priznati američki muslimanski učenjak, borac i aktivist za ljudska prava, humanitarac i govornik. Osnivač je i direktor Yaqeen Instituta za islamsko istraživanje i godinama se bavi međuvjerskim dijalogom. On nam se uključuje iz Dallasa u Teksasu. Omar, hello and welcome to Al Jazeera.
Hello, thank you for having me.
What's the situation regarding the sentiment on Israel and Palestine right now in the US, both inside and outside your relevant circles?
Well, I think that for many Americans, it's mixed messaging and it's mixed feelings. So there are some that wonder why, in the midst of the United States facing all sorts of economic crisis from within, and all sorts of internal issues, why we're spending billions of dollars to destroy places and kill people, and then asking for millions more to then clean up the carnage, while all along not making Americans safer at all. So there's that sentiment within the United States, which is why are we so invested in, policing the world and in sending billions of dollars to Israel to continue its destruction in the Palestinian territories. And then there's the sentiment that I think that many have, which is, where did this come from? And I think that the narrative that this all started on October 7th, ignoring occupation, ignoring apartheid, ignoring the ongoing Palestinian catastrophe, which is now over 70 years, that has unfortunately led to a very biased, intentional narrative that has been spun and received by a great number of people here in the United States, which is that once again, Muslims attacked a peaceful people, and all of these violent Arab Muslim savages are always just, out to get us and out to hurt people that do them no harm. And this is another Islamic terrorist attack. And so you have very similar sentiments to the post 9/11 era, the war on terror type of narrative, which inherently is fueled by tropes about who Muslims are and who Arabs are. And then you have a broader cross-section, I think, of the American public that are asking significant questions about why what they see on social media from on-the-ground reporting of thousands of Palestinian children being decimated to pieces by not just American bombs, but by white phosphorus chemical bombs, by all sorts of advanced military equipment, and we're somehow supposed to be okay with this. So you have a lot of Americans that are asking the question about why what they see on their TV screens does not line up with what they are seeing from alternative sources. It's almost like, and this is, the experience of anyone that's lived in the United States and then lived outside the United States, is that our US news is so different from everything else around the world that it's almost as if we're looking at two worlds. And I think that with the advent of social media and objective voices that are able to shine light on the reality of the situation, you have more Americans asking questions now than they did in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, as to say, well, what's really going on over there? What is the situation? Who are the Palestinian people? What is Gaza? I think that we have to take into consideration that for many people, they have absolutely no idea about this part of the world. It's some, biblical reference that comes up every once in a while, but they have no idea about this part of the world. And so you have to educate and then sometimes re-educate because of how pathetic the coverage has been of the catastrophe, the ongoing catastrophe, which is now just reaching a proportion that we have not seen in decades.
So basically what you're saying now is that the narrative, the Israeli narrative's influence on the media narratives in the US are now at least being changed by the influence of the social media. But what I'm interested in is what it's bringing up in people who are now, you're talking about people finding out for the first time that these things are happening, or the atrocities that have been happening for 70 or 80 years. So is there could we, also for future reference, when we will be talking about what was happening now, can we really say that there is a change in the US happening from the people?
I think that definitely younger generations who are less hostage to legacy media and mainstream outlets, which become nothing more than propaganda outlets for the IDF, those younger folks that are making it a point to familiarize themselves with what's happening in the world beyond what these legacy outlets are telling them, what's happening in the world is leading to a shift in US public opinion. I do think that we're seeing, unfortunately, the ugliest side of Islamophobia once again rear its head. It never really goes away. It just comes back in different manifestations. But at the same time, younger people, yes, they are taking the time to actually explore a narrative other than the one that's been fed to them for all of these years. Now, I think that in that situation, the Israeli PR machine has greatly overestimated itself. We're talking about Palestinian voices, the Palestinian narrative being suppressed, not just by mainstream media outlets here in the United States, but by social media companies that will shadow ban and have their independent fact checkers and instead verify misinformation, to silence the Palestinian voice. And with all of that, with the hundreds of millions of dollars that the Israeli PR machine is throwing at social media, with all of the suppression of Palestinian voices, that is a sign of how atrocious this assault has been, that even that is starting to crumble. Even that's starting to crumble. And people are starting to find out what's actually going on. And I think that that's an opportunity for us.
We'll come back to the opportunity, but while we're still at the public opinion point, you have also been, and not just now, but also in the past, you've been very vocal and you've been part of protests for Palestinian freedom, for ceasefires, and for the peace. So right now, what we are seeing in some of the media outlets, including our own, is the big protests that are happening around the world. But what I want to ask you is about the United States. First, what numbers are we talking about when speaking about these protests in the past month? One more thing, we are filming this interview ahead of the big march on Washington, D.C., where apparently it's supposed to be quite of a big demonstration for asking for the ceasefire and for peace. And I was going to ask you, there's been a lot of talk that the protests in the West are organized and visited only by Muslims or Arabs or Palestinians. And since you're somebody that has been involved in all of this, is that the truth? Can you bring this a bit closer to our audience, this side of the world?
It's absolutely untrue. And I think that it's a testimony to the amount of people from other communities that are no longer willing to accept the stereotyping of Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians and just buy in wholesale to the Israeli propaganda that's been fed to them through mainstream media here. The protests have been multi-faith. They have been larger than ever. To give you a sense of what the numbers look like, so in a place like Dallas, where our protests, typically would be between 1,000 and 2,000, they are regularly exceeding 8,000, 10,000 and more. Protests that used to be 5,000 are now 50,000, 10,000 are now 100,000. If you see the streets of Chicago, if you see the streets in Washington, D.C., the coalitions are broader, the audiences are larger. And that is, once again, a sign of how disgusted people are, how outraged people are at how cheap Palestinian blood has become. A sign of how young people in particular are not willing to accept the West's double standards anymore. And so, yes, you're seeing Muslims, Christians, Jews. In fact, you had the largest anti-occupation Jewish protest in the history of the United States 2 weeks ago, when they demonstrated at Capitol Hill. Groups like Jewish Voice for Peace and If Not Now and others demonstrated at Capitol Hill and you had hundreds of anti-occupation Jewish protesters that were arrested saying, do not use our grief to justify genocide. The same thing happened at the New York Central Station just a few days ago when Israel cut all telecommunications to Gaza. So it is, bringing out, I think, this hopeful element of a true multi-faith movement. You cannot claim that these are fringe groups of people. Multiple coalitions that advocate for Black lives here in the United States, indigenous peoples here in the United States, organizations that advocate for the humanity of refugees and migrants. They are all coming together. Religious organizations are starting to understand that this is not as simplistic as the sadistic narrative that has been fed to the American public suggests it is. And so I'm very encouraged by the number of people that are coming out. I'm very encouraged by the multi-faith dimension of that. And I think that's what also frustrates many of those who try to weaponize anti-Semitism to silence Palestinians. Anti-Semitism is a very real problem here in the West and in the world. But when you have this many Jewish anti-occupation protesters alongside Muslims, Palestinians, Arabs, people of all backgrounds that are saying this is not anti-Semitism. We are opposed to Zionism. We are opposed to an ethno-fascist state that has systematically consumed the rights of Palestinians, taken their territories, taken their land, restricted every single element of their lives, and now is killing them in a spree that we have never seen before in history.
Just briefly to come back to Jews for Peace and if not now, and similar organizations. You're talking about this from the perspective of the Palestinian cause and how important they are for everything now. But I'm just wondering, especially from your religious background and from all your knowledge and experience with interreligious communities, how important do you think they are for the global understanding of Israel and of the whole Judaism, Zionism debate?
Well, I think they're crucial. It's not just Judaism, Zionism here, and the way that you have groups like If Not Now and Jewish Voice for Peace rising to the occasion. It's that along the entire spectrum of Judaism, you have people that are now standing up to this. So you have ultra-Orthodox Jews that are upset with the way that their tradition has been infected by this colonial ideology. And then you have, again, groups that are on the liberal reform side of Judaism that are standing up to this. You have Christians that are now starting to see that, hey, there are Christians here that are being oppressed as well. It shouldn't have to come to this because, human lives should be valued no matter what the faith of those people are. But I think that you have many Christians that are waking up in the United States to the reality that there is a significant population of Palestinian Christians that have historically lived in the land of Palestine and that are being just as disenfranchised and assailed as the Muslim Palestinians are. A friend of mine, Mitri Rahib, who is the head of the Lutheran Church in Palestine, has written an open letter to Christians here in the United States. The third oldest church in the world was bombed in Gaza. And I want you to just see the cruelty and the irony of how that was fact-checked. I personally had posted about that, and Meta had called that false information and had penalized my page. And then Justin Amish, who is a former congressman here in the United States of Palestinian Christian origin, posts the pictures of his relatives who were killed in that bombing. And so it's as if to say, oh, okay, so maybe this did actually happen. What happens is that when Palestinian Christians come under attack, the narrative moves on so quickly because that is so inconvenient to the Israeli propaganda here in the United States to know that Palestinian Christians exist and are just as suppressed as Muslims, because it doesn't allow for the false narrative that this is just Muslims and Jews fighting against each other to stick, that this is just the Arab savages attacking civilized Europeans again to stick. All of that goes out the window when you realize the diversity of the people that are being massacred in this conflict, and the diversity of the people that are now standing up for them in different parts of the world.
I was going to ask you. You mentioned earlier in the interview. You mentioned Islamophobia and the rise of anti-Muslim narrative, sentiment, which we can also say that culminated in an attack on a Palestinian Muslim 6-year-old boy in Chicago. So, you are also a public person, so you have been vocal about everything for the past month as well. What are your experiences with anti-Muslim hate? And, is it really the atmosphere? Is it really reminding you of post 9/11?
I actually want to share a personal story here, which is that a faith leader in Dallas had reached out to me to express his condolences over the horrific murder of Wadir, 6-year-old Palestinian American boy who was stabbed 26 times by his landlord, who he used to see as a grandfather type figure because his landlord was directly incited by the rhetoric of the president and mainstream media here in the United States. And he had expressed condolences to me, and the same person has been parroting the anti-Palestinian bigotry that gave rise to the crimes that have been committed against Wadir and others here in the United States. And I responded and I said, listen, if I was a Palestinian boy in Palestine, if my parents, who are refugees, never settled in this country and I wasn't born and raised in the United States, if I wasn't a Palestinian American, but a Palestinian boy in Palestine, you'd be justifying my murder right now. And so it is two-faced for you to, to say that I care about you here, but I want you dead over there. It is deeply disingenuous. And so it's important to understand that the only difference between Wadir and the 3,000 plus children that have been killed in Palestine is the location and the means by which they were killed, but it's the same hate that has killed them. Islamophobia cannot be separated from anti-Palestinian bigotry, even if not all Palestinians are Muslims, because anti-Palestinian bigotry traffics in the same sorts of framings and stereotypes as Islamophobia does. And so when you dehumanize and frame Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians as untrustworthy people, as people who could flip at any moment and who are looking for the moment by which they can, they can find an opportunity to exploit so they can kill and wreak havoc on civilian populations, of course that suspicion is going to trigger the likes of that landlord in Chicago. And so I think, we are seeing a rise in Islamophobia. We are seeing a rise once again in much of what resembles that post 9/11 climate. There have been Islamophobic incidents all across the United States. But what makes it particularly egregious is that this attacker, this man in Chicago, who committed this heinous hate crime, was directly incited by the President of the United States. He was directly incited by the fake news that the president himself had repeated when the president said he saw the images of beheaded babies, beheaded Israeli babies. The 70-plus-year-old man who's been binge watching mainstream media here in the United States heard that, and along with other information decided to go and behead a Palestinian baby who ran up to him to give him a hug because he thought that he was coming to show him kindness, and instead of being met with a hug, was met with a 12-inch military blade, stabbed 26 times, and his mother stabbed 12 times. I mean, this type of climate is devastating. And once again, just like we see that Israeli and Palestinian lives are not equal in terms of the sentiment that is provoked globally, and here in the United States especially, the conversation has been about anti-Semitism alone. Not to say that, we would be the first to stand up against an attack on an innocent Jewish life in the United States. We've historically done that, and we will do it because it's the right thing to do. But the first Friday, before Wadir was murdered, I believe Wadir was murdered on a Saturday night. That Friday morning, I had heard from all sorts of mainstream media outlets here in the United States saying, what are you doing to basically make sure that this global day of jihad that's been called for doesn't lead to young Muslims going out and carrying out terrorist attacks. And I'm like, what global day of jihad are you talking about, right? But the sentiment was that Muslims are going to snap and start carrying out all sorts of attacks on American soil on that Friday. Well, guess what? We have had multiple attacks on the Muslim community. We have dead children now here in the United States because you have been ignoring dead children in Palestine, and that same hate has come home as well. We need to understand the circumstances by which this is all taking place, and then the consequences of reckless rhetoric that misrepresents those circumstances here and abroad, especially when it comes from the highest office in the United States of America.
Speaking of the highest office in the U.S., you've also mentioned a few episodes from the past month of Joe Biden. I'm wondering how the perception of him is changing, especially from your point of view, where you interact quite a lot with people, also including the protests now. So people from ethnic, religious communities, from minorities, who usually would you would be voters, at least automatically thinking of Joe Biden and the Democrats. How is this influencing their opinion of the Democrats and of Joe Biden?
I think that Joe Biden has disappointed on every front and is an example of a failed president, a failed leader. And I don't think many Muslims, many Arabs are going to be voting for Joe Biden in this next election cycle. I think there's a sense of betrayal from those that did vote for him, that expected something better from him. It's not that, it's not like the Democratic Party has ever been pro-Palestinian, or that, Joe Biden had suggested anything less than being, beholden to the traditional dangerous narrative that has existed throughout both parties here in the United States, and been an active participant in making sure that Israel gets the funding and the cover that it needs to continue its atrocity against the Palestinian people. But I do think that there is an expectation of more balance. I mean, George Bush, who in my opinion has done more harm from the office of the United States president than probably any president, including Donald Trump. George Bush would have expressed more sympathy for Palestinian lives and more outrage at the death of Palestinian civilians in his time than Joe Biden is. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. He has failed and disappointed, and I think that he's going to see that, just as he has failed to see Palestinian humanity all along, that people are going to not see his name on the ballot in 2024. And it's not like Muslims and Arabs are naive to think that Donald Trump offers a better alternative on the Palestinian cause. He's been saying even more harmful things, from outside of the office of the president over the last few weeks. But Joe Biden is in office right now, and despite the pleas of people from within his own ranks, from within his own administration, staffers, and people that he interacted with to get the Muslim and Arab vote, he has continued to give Israel a blank check to commit genocide against the Palestinian people. What I'd say about him in particular, Hanan, is that what's so disappointing is that, if you look at his record on Bosnia, if you look at his record on South African apartheid, if you were to take the same words that he used about the genocide of Srebrenica and apartheid in South Africa and apply them to the Palestinians, then you would see a very different outcome. And so he's become the poster boy of the double standards of the West when it comes to Palestinian humanity.
When you've just given us a few parallels, but let's just, for the end, let's just go back to the political representation or mobilization within the Palestinian community, including diaspora, which is even more significant because of the whole destiny of Palestinian people and where they are displaced, including yourself, born in the United States. What I'm wondering is, with all of the disappointment into the Western politics, is there any political mobilization? Is there, there are some very vocal actors online and in the political sphere as well. I mean, kind of also including yourself. Are there ongoing efforts? Is there an ongoing political mobilization? Are people thinking of, taking things politically into their own hands with all of the disappointment, both into the United States politics, but also into the international community?
Well, I think that there is definitely a recognition that there needs to be a smarter, more cohesive strategy that doesn't, that doesn't buy into the false hope that suddenly structures that have historically disenfranchised Palestinians are going to wake up and have a moral conscience, but instead that penalizes the most egregious, transgressions in this regard. And so I think that there is a recognition and there is, an effort now to sort of galvanize around a common platform and to make sure that those who have erased Palestinian suffering do not do so without any form of political cost. I think that you're going to see that those who have done so are going to regret doing so in 2024 because they're going to see that this impact was one that they had greatly underestimated on their end. I think that you're going to see an energized Muslim base, an energized Palestinian base, an energized Arab base, and an energized, cross section of people that are going to make sure that principled politics, which is rare and becoming increasingly rare, is rewarded, and the corrupt politics that continue to give way to Palestinian suffering is sufficiently penalized. At the international level, it's no secret that the United Nations, unfortunately, only has potency when it serves as an extension of U.S. internationalism and expansionism. And so long as the United Nations is held hostage to, the U.S. veto, then it's effectively ineffective. And so there are efforts right now, and I think it's about time to bring forth prosecution against Israel. And I believe the United States should as well be included in that, because it is not just a passive participant, but an active participant in genocide. And so there are efforts right now to bring forth criminal charges at the ICC against Israel, and the United States as well, included for its participation. These are American bombs that are dropping on the people of Palestine. These are American taxpayer dollars that are being used to fund it. And it is our American president, unfortunately, that clearly has the ability to call for a ceasefire and is not using that ability, but instead sanctioning this ongoing genocide.
Omar, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us at Al Jazeera. All the best.
Thank you.